Alright, so I was going to make a nice painting time-lapse video, but apparently I don't know how to use OBS and ended up just recording an empty window for a long time. So instead I'm going to go through the layers of my study and explain my thought process. First, I pick a background color that I want to fill in behind my work as I paint. Here I choose sort of an eggshell color. Then I spend some time drawing the study. Normally I don't do this and I just sort of block out where I think things should go, but for some reason, I had tremendous difficulty getting the subject to feel right as it was coming together. In fact, this was my third time painting the same study today. Yeah, let's not talk about those. Next, I paint in a shadow just to set the subject in space. It helps me kind of figure out the perspective of what's going on. From here, I add a skin tone to the subject's face. Notice I go behind the hair as well. I think it helps because, your scalp is underneath your hair. So it's nice to have that sort of fill behind what you're doing. It's similar in concept to picking the background color. I then block out the subject's clothes. It kind of helps me get a sense of how to balance the focus in the painting before just diving into one part or another part for too long. Next, using just neutral colors and maybe slightly tinted in towards the actual study, I'm just trying to establish some values here. I do a very bad job at getting the values correct. The range is a little bit too flattened, but it's mostly at this stage I'm just trying to figure out the shape of things and how to express that shape. Then I bring in some color now into the face, into the skin, still sticking to the tones that I picked and with a, constantly in the back of my head thinking about how the shape of what I'm painting actually is supposed to be. It's interesting to look at this layer without the value layer. It kind of looks like it could turn into a whole nother painting by itself. The line work from the sketch earlier really does a lot of work in communicating how the subject is supposed to read. So without the values, you really end up relying on lines, I think. After bringing back everything, the next step I do is I sort of color correct the shadow and, again, work on her clothes a little bit. There's a little bit of blue in the shadow. It's cooler than her face, which is a lot more warm. Here, I feel like I've gotten a pretty good sense of the structure of the subject or the study, and I go in and basically do the same thing except at a more refined scale. There's a huge difference between the previous state and the current state, and this is kind of what happens in the refinement layer. I usually have trouble deciding when to start doing this, when to transition from, the more higher level macro thought process to starting to refine smaller areas. For me, I think it helps a lot to get a sense of the whole painting. I think people call this thumbnailing. The clothes frustrate me a bit here. They're a little bit overworked. I kind of just go and flatten out what really isn't needed in terms of the brushwork that I've done. I also think her skin's a little too pale. It doesn't read correctly slightly, and the value on the shadow on her cheeks and her jawline are a little bit too light, so I go over with an overlay layer, kind of cheating here a bit, just to warm it up a little bit and then also darken the shadow. One thing I want to look at is these last few layers with all the previous structural work hidden. You can see how much of the actual painting is done here in contrast to how much of the thinking was done earlier. Counterintuitively, these later steps usually take me much less time. It shows how important understanding the shape of what you're painting is, almost like a sculptor. I've seen more skilled painters communicate this level of detail with significantly more finesse and less finagling. There's always room for improvement. Finally, I just add some small touches to her face, again, just to take out some of the parts that look like they've been overworked. So I kind of go in with a higher opacity brush just to, flatten certain things out. At this point, I feel like I'm done with the study. In reflection, I think this type of lighting and the subject's facial structure and expression gave me the most trouble. Another thing to improve on is to actually learn how to use brushes. Doing everything with a round brush feels really inefficient at times. Despite being fairly loose in my brush movement, the final result ended up weirdly creamy. I'm not really sure how to fix this yet, since sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Anyways, that's all. Hope this video didn't bore anyone to sleep.